Richard Wagner may well be the most influential European composer of the second half of the 19th century. Never shy about self-promotion, Wagner himself clearly thought so. In actuality, Wagner's influence was both musical and literary. To cite one example, Wagner's employment of the Tristan chord in his music drama Tristan and Isolde shaped the harmonic experiments of even the French, whose music belies their many verbal denouncements of Wagner and his music. Wagner's volumes of essays about music and his autobiographical accounts of his musical experiences were widely followed by 19th century individuals, from the average bourgeois music enthusiast to philosophers such as Friedrich Nietzsche. Most disturbingly, Wagner was rabidly anti-Semitic, and generations later his writings and music provided propaganda for the Nazi Third Reich. Although all of these issues are worth further consideration, this video has a much more narrow scope. It summarizes ways in which Beethoven influenced Wagner and ways in which Wagner influenced subsequent reception and performance of Beethoven's music. Do consult a good music history textbook about other important issues pertaining to Richard Wagner and his music. For Wagner, Beethoven was the greatest composer who had ever lived, except, of course, for himself. Indeed, it is through exalting Beethoven and then setting himself up as Beethoven's heir that Wagner promoted himself as the future of music. Wagner repeatedly reflected on Beethoven's life and music. The essays on this screen contain merely some of his most striking pronouncements. In Beethoven's music, Wagner heard the source of his own melodic, rhythmic, and harmonic styles. In the choral finale to the Ninth Symphony, Wagner saw the triumph of the musical dramatic idea over mere instrumental music. He then traced this musical dramatic idea as coming to fruition in his own music dramas. Wagner's own ideas about Beethoven would shape the Beethoven reception of the individuals who read them. Richard Wagner perhaps even more directly influenced late 19th century encounters with Beethoven's music through his own conducting of Beethoven's symphonies. In 1873, Wagner published an essay detailing his approach. Most interestingly, he laid out the changes he had made to Beethoven's music, and that he recommended others make in Beethoven's scores for performance by contemporary orchestras. As I hope you've already discovered from your reading of David Pickett's essay, Wagner was well aware of the controversy that his reorchestrations and in some cases virtually recompositions might create. He wrote, for instance, of those who, quote, will doubtless condemn those proposals of mine as violations of a holy script. Wagner's reference to Beethoven's music as a holy script was influenced by the 19th century idea of Werktreue. Werktreue is the practice of being true to the score as it was set down by its composer. It is a value still held by many musicians today. Maintaining Werktreue became more difficult for performers as the orchestra changed. In the late 19th century, the orchestra featured more instrumentalists than the orchestras with which Beethoven had worked. These late 19th century performers played with more technologically advanced instruments at a, generally speaking, higher level of virtuosity. Conductors such as those pictured on the screen, as well as Gustav Mahler, who we'll talk about in another video, thus had practical issues to consider as they presented Beethoven's works with their late 19th century and early 20th century orchestras. As Pickett's article establishes, later conductors often based their changes on Wagner's changes. Like Wagner, they often went to considerable lengths to justify their changes as coherent with the original score. Their arguments and additions are worth considering as we continue to perform Beethoven's symphonies in the 21st century.